February 2025. The former Castalloy factory site in North Plympton, Adelaide, previously owned by Harry Phipps. Excavators bite into red earth, removing soil that's been undisturbed for decades. Police stand patiently at the perimeter. Eager media crews wait at a distance. 3 metres down below the fill Harry Phipps added to this site in 1970, they're searching for the truth about what happened to the Beaumont children on January 26, 1966. The dig is based on 2 stories that align too perfectly to ignore. 2 brothers who claim they were paid in £1 notes to dig a grave-sized hole here just days after the Beaumont children vanish. And Phipps' own son, Hayden, who saw 3 children matching the Beaumont's description enter his father's property that day. According to investigators, Hayden repeatedly told them, "The children are in the pit, the sandpit." Professor Maciej Henneberg works with forensic precision. Shovel, then trowel, the way archaeologists uncover ancient burials. The soil tells a story: disturbed earth, a pit, 2 metres long, matching the dimensions exactly. Evidence of something that was deliberately buried and then covered. The nation watches and holds its breath. After 60 years, perhaps the Beaumont children will finally be found. But when the excavation ends, there are no remains, only disturbed soil and even more unanswered questions. Welcome back to Struth, a podcast exploring Australia's most perplexing mysteries. This is part 2 of our investigation into the disappearance of the Beaumont children in 1966. Today we're going to have a look at the suspects, the excavations, and a pattern that connects this case to another Adelaide tragedy. But before we begin part 2, if you haven't listened to part 1 of this investigation, please go back and do so now. This episode continues directly from where we left off, and you'll need the context of what happened on Australia Day 1966 to fully understand the investigation that followed. And also just a reminder that the topics that we're covering today include the potential murder of multiple children. So listener discretion is well and truly advised. Over the decades, investigation into the Beaumont children's disappearance would examine more than 100 potential suspects. Some were credible persons of interest with genuine connections to the case. Others were merely names thrown up by tips, rumours, or even their own false confessions. But 3 suspects in particular would come to dominate investigators' attention, each for different reasons, each with evidence both compelling and problematic. Bevan Spencer von Einem became one of Australia's most notorious killers after his 1984 conviction for murdering 15-year-old Richard Calvin, son of Adelaide TV newsreader Rob Calvin. He remains the only person convicted in connection with the family murders, a series of 5 sadistic murders of young males in Adelaide between 1979 and 1983. Von Einem's crimes were horrifying. He targeted teenage boys and young men, drugging them with sedatives, holding them captive, sexually assaulting and torturing them. The connection to the Beaumont case surfaced during Von Einem's 1990 committal hearing. An informant identified only as Mr. B testified that Von Einem had boasted about taking 3 children from a beach several years earlier. According to Adelaide Police Detective Bob O'Brien, Mr. B was generally a reliable source who provided important information during the Calvin investigation. Mr. B alleged Von Einem claimed he took 3 children home to conduct experiments, and when one child died during the procedure, he killed the other 2 and dumped all bodies in bushland south of Adelaide. In 2007, police examined archival Channel 7 footage from the original 1966 search, finding a young man among onlookers who bore a striking resemblance to a youthful Von Einem. Von Einem was known at the time to frequent Glenelg Beach, specifically to watch children in the changing rooms. He was described by many as preoccupied with children. But the problems with Von Einem as the Beaumont perpetrator are substantial and probably insurmountable. He was only 19 years old on January 26, 1966, far younger than the mid-30s man witnesses described. Even more problematic, all of Von Einem's known victims were males, specifically teenage boys and young men aged 14 to 25. The Beaumont children included two girls, Jane, 9, and Anna, 7. This represents a dramatic deviation in victim selection that serial offenders rarely display. It's also important to note that police reception of Mr. B's alleged confessions was, well, mixed. Detective Bob O'Brien noted that other details relayed by Mr. B did not fit known facts about the Beaumont case and were regarded with scepticism. Von Einem died in prison in 2013 without ever confessing to the Beaumont abductions. He remains a person of interest primarily because he refused to cooperate, and he's a convicted child murderer capable of extreme violence. But the age and victim profile issues make him an unlikely perpetrator. The second suspect is Derek Percy, who admitted being at Glenelg Beach with his family on Australia Day 1966. This single fact made him a significant person of interest, despite being only 17 years old at the time. Again, far younger than witness descriptions. Percy was Australia's longest serving prisoner, detained from 1969 until his death in 2013, 44 years of imprisonment. His only conviction was for murdering 12-year-old Yvonne Toohey, whom he abducted from Ski Beach in Warneet, Victoria on July the 27th, 1969. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity in 1970 and detained indefinitely. In 2014, a coroner formally ruled posthumously that Percy had also abducted and killed 7-year-old Linda Stillwell in 1968. He was suspected of involvement in 8 to 9 other child deaths. Percy's statements about the Beaumont case are both incriminating and frustratingly vague. In a 1969 interview shortly after his arrest for the Toohey murder, when asked by a friend, who was also a young policeman at the time, Percy stated that he was in Adelaide at the time and that he could have killed them, but he didn't remember a thing. This pattern of placing himself at crime scenes while claiming memory loss characterised all of Percy's responses to accusations about multiple child murders. He used phrases like, "I could have," "possibly," "I might have," "I don't remember." Psychiatrists found he had the capacity to repress memories of crimes. But in addition to being too young to match witness descriptions, Percy is also considered an unlikely suspect because there's no evidence that he had access to a car in 1966, which would have been essential for transporting 3 children. Percy died in July 2013 of lung cancer. Police questioned him on his deathbed, hoping for a confession. He remained chatty, but made no admissions, dying without ever confessing to any crimes beyond Yvonne Toohey's murder. Our third suspect, Harry Phipps, didn't become a suspect until 2007, 3 years after his death. When he was alive, moving through Adelaide's social elite in the 1960s, Phipps was a successful businessman, a millionaire factory owner, a member of church and state circles. He lived at the corner of Augusta and Sussex Streets in Glenelg, only a couple of 100 metres from Collie Reserve, where the children were last seen playing with the unidentified man. Phipps was 48 years old on Australia Day 1966, much older than the mid-30s age witnesses described, though multiple sources would later confirm that he looked a lot younger than his years, with what some called a babyish face. He was 6'1" with light brown hair, a thin face, suntan complexion, and an athletic build. He bore a striking resemblance to the witness descriptions. But it wasn't his physical appearance that made Phipps a suspect. it was his own son's testimony. In 2007, Hayden Phipps, Harry's eldest son, who was 15 years old in 1966, came forward with devastating allegations. He stated his father had sexually abused him from ages 3 to 13, abuse that involved Harry wearing satin dresses. The swoosh of that satin dress coming down the hall, Hayden recalled, meant he knew what he was in for. The next morning, Harry would appear at breakfast, like nothing had happened. But Hayden's most explosive claim concerned the Beaumont children. He stated he was in his backyard treehouse on January 26, 1966, when he saw 3 children, matching the Beaumont's description, enter the property with his father around lunchtime. The children went inside through the back gate. Hayden later saw them being carried to a car, a Cadillac, with fins. Hayden repeatedly stated over the years, the children are in the pit, the sand pit, at the Castalloy factory. Polygraph expert Steve Van Apperen analysed Hayden's recorded interview and concluded, he's telling the truth, but he knows more. Independent experts in Holland analysing his statements reached similar conclusions. Statistics show only 5 to 8% of child sexual abuse allegations are false, giving Hayden's claims high credibility. He died in 2016, never wavering from his account. The circumstantial evidence supporting Phipps as the perpetrator is extensive. He owned Castalloy, an aluminium foundry in North Plympton, Adelaide, a factory with extensive property, a cottage that was out of bounds to all staff except Harry Phipps, and most significantly, a furnace. Around 1970, 4 years after the Beaumont children disappeared, Phipps allegedly added approximately 1 metre of fill to some sections of the factory grounds, potentially providing additional protection to a burial site. Phipps was also known to give out £1 notes to children, exactly the denomination Jane used to buy lunch. 2 brothers came forward claiming they were paid by a man matching Phipps' description to dig a 2 metre by 1 metre by 2 metre grave-sized hole at the Castalloy factory 2 to 3 days after the children had disappeared. They were paid in £1 notes. The location of Phipps's home created what investigators call a perfect triangle between the Collier Reserve, Wenzel's Bakery, where the children made their final confirmed purchase, and his residence. His front door looked directly down Sussex Street to Jetty Road. He could have encountered the children at the beach, walked them a short distance to his home using the story he'd established during earlier grooming sessions, and transported them to his factory with minimal risk of detection. A factory that on a public holiday would have been deserted. Multiple allegations identify Phipps as what investigators call an undetected serial predatorial paedophile. A woman came forward in 2018 alleging Phipps raped and sodomised her in the 1970s when she was 14 near his factory. And in 2025, new evidence revealed that Phipps's niece married a cousin of Jim Beaumont in the years after the disappearance, a family connection that could explain how Phipps might have known the children and established their trust. Former South Australian Detective Bill Hayes stated, in this particular case we've got over 30 coincidences lining up to Mr. Phipps. Hayes spent years investigating the connection and concluded, I tried really hard to put holes in the theory, but I'm convinced he's the one. And Hayes mustn't have been alone. Over the years, both police and private consortiums have excavated Phipps' Castalloy factory site with the hopes of finding evidence or perhaps even the remains of the children. In November 2013, the first excavation searched a 1 metre squared section at the North Plympton factory site. Ground-penetrating radar found one small anomaly which can indicate movement or objects within the soil. Excavation revealed no additional evidence. Police announced at the time that this line of inquiry is now at an end. But it wasn't the end. In January 2018, Channel 7 Adelaide sponsored a private investigation using advanced technology. Electrical resistivity tomography, which measures electrical resistance in the soil, surveyed the site. The technology identified grave-like stratigraphic features with anomalous resistivity values. Hope surged again. After 52 years, perhaps the children had finally been found. On February the 2nd, 2018, excavators returned. A 9-hour dig reached approximately 1.5 metres depth. Media crews gathered. Family members waited. The nation watched. They found animal bones and general rubbish, but nothing related to the Beaumont case. The dig cost taxpayers approximately $250,000 and yielded nothing but disappointment. Still not the end. Earlier this year, February 2025, 59 years after the disappearance, independent MP Frank Pangallo organised a privately funded week-long search with forensic archaeologist Professor Maciej Henneberg, author Stuart Mullins, and former South Australian detective Bill Hayes. This excavation was more extensive than previous efforts. Over 3,000 cubic metres of soil were removed, digging 3 metres deep to reach the 1966 ground level. The rationale was compelling. Phipps had added approximately 1.5 to 2 metres of fill to the site in around 1970, meaning that previous digs hadn't gone deep enough. They needed to reach the ground level that existed in January 1966, before Phipps had altered the landscape. For a week, excavators worked methodically. They found a pit 2 metres long, 2 metres deep, of disturbed material. The dimensions matched the grave-sized hole the two brothers claimed they'd been paid to dig. Professor Henneberg excavated with forensic precision using shovel and trowel, the way archaeologists uncover ancient burial sites. The soil told a story of something being buried and later covered. The disturbance patterns suggested deliberate concealment. Everything pointed to this being the location. But there were no remains of the children. Phipps died in 2004 before becoming a public suspect and cannot be questioned. He was never formally cleared, but neither was he ever charged. The evidence against him is substantial, but circumstantial. Without a body, without physical evidence, without the ability to interrogate him, the case against Harry Phipps remains compelling but unproven. Seven years had passed since the Beaumont children vanished from Glenelg Beach. 7 years of unanswered questions, of parents who kept porch lights burning, of a nation that had learned to lock its doors. The investigation had gone cold, leads exhausted, hope dimmed, but never quite extinguished. Then on August the 25th, 1973, history repeated itself in the most horrifying way imaginable. Adelaide Oval was packed that afternoon. 13,000 spectators crammed into the stands to watch Norwood take on North Adelaide in an Australian rules football match. Among them sat the Ratcliffe family, Les and Kathleen with their 11-year-old daughter Joanne and their oldest son. Nearby, 4-year-old Kirsty Gordon sat with her grandmother while her parents attended a function in Renmark. The day was bright and unusually warm. Joanne, who had been to the Oval dozens of times, knew her way around the grounds intimately. During the game, she struck up a friendship with little Kirsty, the way children do, easy, immediate, uncomplicated. So when Kirsty needed to use the bathroom during the third quarter, Joanne volunteered to take her. The two girls headed off together hand in hand toward the women's facilities about 300 metres from where their family sat. They never returned. When 15 minutes passed with no sign of the girls, Kathleen Ratcliffe's concern turned to alarm. She went looking. Then Les joined the search. Then Kirsty's grandmother, as the final siren sounded. They were still searching, their panic mounting with each passing minute. At approximately 5 o'clock, an announcement crackled over the Oval's PA system, asking for Joanne Ratcliffe and Kirsty Gordon to return to their families. But witnesses had already seen something that would transform this from a case of lost children into something far more sinister. Anthony Kilmartin, a teenager selling lollies at the match, had seen a man carrying a young girl under his right arm, walking quickly toward the southern gate. An older girl, who he would later identify from photographs as Joanne, had been following, looking frightened. She tried to stop the man, kicking him in the knee, but the man had kept walking, moving with a purpose, and witnesses assumed he was simply a frustrated parent dealing with difficult children. Other witnesses reported seeing the girls near a bridge by the Adelaide Zoo, about a kilometre from the Oval. One witness claimed to have seen them between North Adelaide Railway Station and Port Road in Thebarton. Then nothing. The girls had simply vanished into the crowded streets of Adelaide. By 5:12 p.m, police had been notified. By evening, the entire nation was reliving a nightmare. The parallels to the Beaumont case were impossible to ignore. Multiple children taken in broad daylight from a crowded public place, no bodies found, no belongings recovered, and most chillingly of all, the description of the man seen with the girls. Detective work quickly revealed the connections. The police sketch of the Adelaide Oval suspect bore a striking resemblance to the sketch from the Beaumont case 7 years earlier. Both described a thin-faced man. Both estimated him to be in his 30s to mid-40s, which meant if it was the same perpetrator, he'd aged exactly 7 years between the crimes. The modus operandi showed both similarities and differences. The Beaumont children had appeared comfortable with their abductor, suggesting grooming over multiple beach visits. Joanne and Kirsty, however, had never met their attacker before. This was opportunistic, forceful, brazen, yet the core elements remained. Multiple children, public place, daytime abduction, complete disappearance. South Australian police formally stated their belief that the cases were connected. A 1979 coronial inquiry into the Adelaide Oval abductions concluded that the girls had been taken either by force or under duress by a man whose identity remained unknown. When the cases are examined side by side, certain suspects emerged who fit the timeline for both abductions. Arthur Stanley Brown, a Queensland carpenter, bore an uncanny resemblance to both police sketches. When he was arrested years later for the murders of two young sisters in Townsville, witnesses came forward claiming Brown had mentioned seeing the Adelaide Festival Centre nearing completion, placing him in Adelaide around the time of the Oval abductions. No evidence was ever found to show that he was in Adelaide in 1966, but the investigators could not rule out a connection. Stanley Arthur Hart, a known Adelaide paedophile charged with child sex offences in 1966, was another possibility. His family confirmed he rarely missed a North Adelaide match and was present at the Oval on August the 25th, 1973. Properties he'd owned were excavated multiple times, just like Phipps, but nothing was found. Joanne's sister would later state, "In my heart of hearts, I believe it was Hart." For Jim and Nancy Beaumont, January 26, 1966 never ended. That day continued for 53 and 57 years, respectively. Every morning they awoke with the same unanswered questions. Every phone call potentially being the one that brings news, and every anniversary, yet another reminder of the children who never came home. In those first horrible days, Nancy was placed under sedation. Jim rode in police patrol cars searching through the night, then got his own car and kept searching when police stopped. 5 days after the disappearance, he appealed for his children's return on national television and broke down, unable to continue. The cruelty that followed would test them beyond endurance. In 1968, they received letters purporting to be from Jane, arranging a meeting at Dandenong Post Office in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, hundreds of kilometres away. They drove there, hope building with every kilometre, but nobody appeared. It was a teenager's hoax. In 1990, newspapers published computer-generated images of what the children would look like as adults, against the parents' wishes. Nancy refused to look at them. People approached Nancy in public to accuse her of involvement. Even some police cast suspicion on the parents. The Beaumont stopped speaking to the media after 1968. Too traumatised to continue. They separated in the early 70s and later divorced, though they remained friends, united by a shared loss. Nancy lived until September the 16th, 2019, 53 years of not knowing. A friend who visited her near the end said Nancy told him, "I've been through so much, nothing can hurt me anymore." Jim lived until April the 9th, 2023, 57 years of searching, and both died without answers. But their tragedy rippled outward, transforming an entire nation. Before that fateful day, it was completely normal for children to travel unsupervised on buses, visit beaches alone, roam freely. Nancy wasn't being careless, she was being a normal 1960s Australian mother. But after the Beaumont children disappeared, that ordinary life ended for every family in Australia. Parents became instantly more vigilant. Stranger danger was introduced. "Remember what happened to the Beaumont children?" became a refrain heard everywhere. People began locking their doors and children lost the carefree ability to explore independently. The case also revealed critical law enforcement gaps. Just 2 officers, 1 phone, no immediate roadblocks, classification as missing persons rather than homicide. These failures led to long-term changes. South Australian Police have retained a policy. The disappearance is described as the day Australia lost its innocence. Before the Beaumont children, Australia saw itself as safe. But after that Australia Day, 1966, that illusion was shattered. The nation realised that predators do exist in their communities, and that no amount of sunshine could protect children from someone determined to harm them. Between 2016 and 2018 alone, police received 159 Crime Stoppers calls, 1 every 4 days, 60 years later. The Beaumont children are still on the mind of a nation, and they've become part of Australia's cultural mythology, taught to new generations as a watershed moment. Jane would be 67 years old now. Anna would be 65. Grant would be 62. Instead, they're frozen forever at 9, 7 and 4, children who walked into a mystery that has endured for 6 decades and revealed uncomfortable truths about society that failed to protect them. 7 years after the Beaumont children vanished, Joanne Ratcliffe and Kirsty Gordon disappeared from Adelaide Oval under strikingly similar circumstances. They too have never been found. The connections between these cases are impossible to ignore, but for the families a connection offers no comfort. If the same man took all 5 children, Jane, Anna, Grant, Joanne and Kirsty, then he was one of Australia's most successful child murderers, operating in plain sight, vanishing without trace. If they were different perpetrators, then Adelaide in the 1960s and 70s was a hunting ground for multiple predators who left behind nothing but grief and questions. Either possibility is unthinkable. Both might be true. Thanks for listening to this special 2-part investigation. Next week, we'll be exploring a very different kind of Australian mystery, one that takes us to Victoria's high country, the home of a reclusive hermit known only as the Button Man. And just before I go, I just want to send a big thank you to everyone who's shown their support for the show so far, who shared it with a friend or liked us on one of our social media platforms. If there's a case that you'd like me to discuss, that you want me to investigate, an Australian mystery, true crime or otherwise, please reach out either on Instagram or Facebook or struthpodcast@gmail.com. Until next week, thank you very much.